Alrighty team, it is that time of year again, time to set goals for the new year. This is honestly one of my favorite times of the year because goal setting is very much my jam, and as you can see, I am working with this list of prompts. This is a list that I wrote out for effectively anybody who wants to use it, but you can see it's broken up into sections. We have figuring out your goals, selecting your goals, action planning your goals, and the month ahead. So I'm going to be working through this list to set my goals for 2023. As said, this list is for anybody who wants it. There is a link in the description box below if you want to follow my process. As you can see, there are quite a few steps. This is a pretty in-depth kind of system, or, in-depth compared to some, I suppose. So it is going to take me a while, and I am going to do it over multiple days. But let us start day one. Starting at the start, a very good place to start. We are figuring out our goals. So step number one is to make a brainstorm of the possible goals you have for the next year. You aren't committing to any of these yet, but trying to get them all out on paper. As you can see, for the purposes of my goal setting, I am using my Ginormotor notebook from Archer and Olive. This one has lined pages, so I don't really use it for regular bullet journaling. I use it more for brainstorming, mind mapping, just jotting stuff down in a kind of messy format. And because my goal setting is a messy process, I figured it would work well in this book. I'm going to do my brainstorm over here, and I think I'm going to do it as a mind map, just because I like mind maps. It allows me to kind of connect ideas and branch thoughts off one another, so we'll do that one now. Obviously this section is time-lapsed, I cannot write this fast, and I did also cut out any parts where I kind of just sat back and thought about stuff. I just put on a playlist, some chill music, and really got all of my thoughts out onto paper. As said, we aren't committing to any of these ideas just yet, we're just trying to get them down. Some of these might be goals that we pursue in the year ahead, some of them we might just write down as things that would be nice to do, and some of them might get scrapped entirely. That's totally okay. I just find that anytime I come to setting my goals, I have some initial ideas that are pretty much at the forefront of my mind, or they kind of cloud my vision in terms of anything else that I might want to do. So getting those onto the paper just means that I've noted them down. Yes, I do possibly want to do these, but now I can think of other ideas as well. Once I had mind mapped my thoughts though, I did also think it would be good to have a list of some of the potential goals that could come out of these different areas. So I put those on the right hand side of the spread. Again, we're just trying to get them onto the paper so that they're not cluttering up our head as we move on to future steps in this goal setting and planning process. You can see this is where I got to though, so I have my kind of mind map section, which is more areas than it is specific written out goal kind of things. So you can see I first went into the different areas of life, so home, Vogel, who's my partner, fun, finances, friends, family, personal development and work, and then I later on added in simplicity because that's kind of something that I want to possibly tend towards in the year ahead. And then from there I went into deeper categories. So for instance, in terms of fun, say, we've got things like date nights, adventures, social hangouts, media consumption, and by this I mean books, movies, TV shows, all of that kind of stuff, chill time, and the 101 things list. You can kind of see what I'm going with here though. From this, it kind of outlined the general ideas that I had in terms of categories that I want to work on or have goals in. So from there, I wrote out a goal brainstorm of just the ones in particular that came to mind. I do have some more space on this page, so if while we're going through the subsequent steps, I have some more ideas of goals that I want to jot down in the moment, I can just put those here. Flipping over though, and we are going to get into step number 2. So our second step is to write a list of the things and feelings you value. Brainstorm what things you can do to embrace those in the year ahead. Now, I could do this one as a mind map, but I have done a mind map already, and I could probably do it as a list as well. So I might write the things or feelings that I value at the top of the list, and then bullet point underneath those what I could do to embrace those. As I'm putting down my values, you can see some of them came to me quite quickly. These are ones that I have previously identified as things that I do value, while other things took a little bit of time to figure out. For each of those, as said, I just put down some dot points of what I thought I could do to foster that in the year ahead. So for instance, for my authenticity one, this is things like updating my social media imagery to be a bit more me. Doing things like hangouts and live streams because that's unedited and it means that you get to see a little bit more of my quote authentic self. But it can also include things like just adding a little bit more personality into my videos. Not to say that my videos don't have personality, I suppose, but more of that. You can see the other areas I identified though were comfort, freedom, connection, providing value, and fun. And I've got some dot points for each of those. But moving on to number 3, write a list of each of your life areas. And then it gives some examples of the different life areas. And then for each area, rate it out of 10, with 10 being the best possible rating and 1 being the worst. You may also want to reflect on why you assigned each area the rating you did. Now, with this kind of thing, you can tell it's kind of based on the level 10 life, or the wheel of life, depending on which kind of source material you're using. But it can be very good to get a clear picture of what you reckon a 5 is, or what you feel a 7 is. I find that with an even scale like this, it's quite helpful to think of a 5 and a 6, or the middle 2 numbers, as a slightly negative or slightly positive kind of rating. So if 6 is slightly positive and 5 is slightly negative, that means that a 3 would be fairly negative, and a 7 or 8 would be fairly positive. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. But first I need to write out what my life areas are. Thankfully I use pretty much the same life areas every single time I do this, so writing those down doesn't take too long. One that I have added to that list, compared to the last times that I've done this level 10 life assessment, is that of fun/leisure, because I found it wasn't on my list and it's kind of important. It's literally one of my values, so realistically it should be in my level 10 life. Going through each of those though and having a think about how satisfied I am with those areas, I do find that I am typically a kind of harsh marker. It also very much depends on what's going on at the time. So for instance, if things are kind of tumultuous with our finances, then the finance category would get rated lowly, whereas if I come off a very good earning month, then it's not so bad. What I typically like to do when I do my level 10 life assessment though is actually go back and have a look at my last ratings to see if those have gone up, down, or stayed the same. So jumping into my current bullet journal, which I have my last level 10 life assessment in, and if we flip to that one, so in terms of these, I rated physical health last time as a 2, so let's say now and before. So before was a 2. Mental health previously was a 4, so that stayed the same. Personal development was a 4, so that's also stayed the same. Finances was a 3 though, so that one has gone up, which is good, which also kind of makes sense because we just came off a good earning month. So in terms of Vogel, which I listed as partner, I was a 7, now I'm a 6. Oop. That's gone down. So social connections, we had a 5 and that's currently at a 6, so that is an improvement. Family connections, we had at a 5, we're still at a 5. Fun and leisure obviously wasn't there before, so we don't actually have a rating for that one. Home environment, I had as a 5, now at a 4. And work or career was at a 6, now at a 7, so that one has gone up as well. When you're doing this type of comparison though, it does very much pay to have the same scale each time, because if you're marking against different criteria each time, then the numbers don't necessarily mean a lot. I think that's probably something that I need to write down for myself, but that is a future me problem, which I might actually just go and add to the goal brainstorm. Make a formal scale for the level 10 life. There we go. So in terms of this, I'm just going to write down whether they increased or decreased, and then we can move on to number 4. Our fourth task says, write a list of the big and small things that are bothering you in life. Which of these are within your control to change, or have ways that you can mitigate them? So effectively, the list of bother. Well, let's write this one over here. In setting up the list, I decided to have a column on the left-hand side where I could tick or cross regarding whether I could control or mitigate that bother, and then another column to write out what was actually wrong. Admittedly, when I was writing the list, my mind tended towards things that I do have control over in some way, shape, or form, but I used a tick to represent things that I could control or can mitigate, a squiggle to represent things that I have some control over, like there's some element within that that I have control over, and then a cross to denote things that I do not have control over, though I only ended up with one of those. So you can see this is where my list ended up, and the only thing that I have that I can't control is how expensive things are, but I did note that I can control how much I buy, and thus, in theory, how much I spend. The list of bother is done though. Technically speaking, I probably could think of more things that were bothering me, but they'd probably fall into the realm of stuff I don't have control over, so I'd rather focus on the things that I do have control over because I can set goals around how to mitigate or eliminate that bother. Step number 5 though is to brainstorm the types of things that you would like to have achieved or experienced by the end of your life. Which of these are the most important? I think I'll probably be able to do that in the space down here. So we'll give it a title and get to writing it down. This is our space to dream big. A lot of people underestimate the amount of stuff they can do in 5 years, so if we're thinking about like end of life plans, it's probably a fair bit of time that we're trying to plan out here. At least for me, I plan on living for a fair bit longer. So what are my big pie in the sky type goals for life? Of course, just like every other part in this goal setting process, this is completely up to you. Do not let the goals of others dictate what your goals are. Just because somebody's goals are to, I don't know, settle down, buy a country house and raise sheep or something, your goal does not have to be that. Distinctly, my goal is not that. I'm not really an animal person. Anyway, we're getting a little sidetracked here, but back to the brainstorming of my big life goals. Some of the things that I'm adding to this list are a bit more fuzzy, they're not quite as specific, whereas some of them are quite specific and things that I like to consider as being on my apocalypse, or list of things that I would like to do before the apocalypse. My little brainstorm has a good little collection though, so things like traveling, building connections and community, and then, as said, some specific things like carving a jack-o'-lantern and getting a well. Very similar things must be on this list. I know that carving a jack-o'-lantern probably seems weird, but we don't have good carving pumpkins in New Zealand, so I'd probably have to go overseas, or I don't know, can you import pumpkins? I'm not even sure, but it's something that I've wanted to do for ages, so it went on the big life goals list, even though it probably seems really mundane. For number 6 though, this one tells us to write a list of the things that make you uncomfortable or are outside of your comfort zone. Which of these are areas you'd like to work on? Notably, this page is full, so flipping on over, and we will set up a list for just that. Now, in terms of this, I think I'm probably going to do it similar to the tick list that we had back here for the what can I change or what can I not change. So effectively, a space to tick off the ones that I actually might want to focus on, and then a place to just write out what those areas of discomfort are. Thinking of the stuff that makes us uncomfortable isn't necessarily a comfy place to be in, so this is another one where I've cut out points where I kind of just had to sit back and think about stuff. Obviously, when you're doing this, you don't actually have to put it on the internet, you don't have to share it with anybody at all, so do be honest in this stage because it's kind of just another example of us trying to soul search to think about the stuff that we want to improve on in the year ahead. Also notably, while I'm writing this list, I'm not putting things down that I absolutely know that I'm not going to want to work on. I'm not great at public speaking. I actually really dislike public speaking in front of a live audience, where they're right there in front of my face. I have no interest in working on that next year, so I'm not going to bother putting that down on this list because I know it's not going to end up being one of my goals. Another thing that makes me uncomfortable is babysitting young children, but I have no intention of doing that next year either, so it's not getting added to the list. So here is where we have my list, and I'm pretty sure almost all of these are going to be things that I want to work on, so I'm just going to go tick those off now. You see, a lot of them are definitely related to content creation or kind of admin around content creation. By this point in the process, you'll probably start to see some trends emerging in your own goal setting process, and that's kind of what we're trying to do here. We're trying to see what kind of stuff comes up repeatedly. Number 7 though is write lists of the things you want to keep doing, start doing, and stop doing in the year ahead. How would doing this improve life for you? I'm going to write this one as 3 lists, so start, stop, keep, or something like that. And underneath each bullet point, I'm going to put a space to actually write out how that would improve my life. As with all of the parts of this goal setting process, you can really set them up in multiple ways. We could use an Alistair method here, or we could just write it out in bullet points and write keep stop, start at the start of every sentence or something like that, but I kind of like the idea of having them in different formats based on the information, just for, I don't know, the ease of usability when it comes back to looking through these items. In other parts of the figuring out your goal stage, we haven't really delved into the why behind it, except maybe for the level 10 life, if you put some reasons behind why you gave each of those life areas different scores. But in thinking about how doing these things would improve your life, we're helping ourselves to uncover our reasoning behind why these things ended up in the columns that they're in. For instance, with my list, a lot of the time things came down to enjoyment. So I'm either going to keep doing them because I enjoy them, I'm going to stop doing them because I don't enjoy them, or I'm going to start doing them because I think that I'd enjoy them. It effectively just highlights to me that enjoyment and fun and that kind of stuff is something that I probably want to prioritize in the year ahead. Now though, we are on to the selecting your goals section, and our first point here, number 8, is what are the recurring themes from the previous prompts? What goals do these themes translate into? So what I'm going to do is grab some of my tombos out, and I'm actually going to highlight parts that are effectively the same kind of theme. So things related to enjoyment will maybe get pink or something like that. Things related to content creating might get blue. It just allows you to see how many times similar things have come up so that you can really start to see what your priorities are. Going through all of the things we've written down so far though, I decided to go with a series of 8 colours. So pink for fun stuff, orange for anything that was kind of physical or mental health related, which also included household stuff, because although I kind of feel like home environment versus mental and physical health are separate in a way, I find that a lot of the stuff that I wrote down about the house was related to my mental health. So I've grouped those together. We have yellow for my personal development stuff, so things like learning, taking up challenges, stuff like that. Green is for finances, because it just makes sense in my head. Pale blue is for anything related to work. Dark blue is for anything related to Vogel. The more blue purple is anything related to family, and the more magenta kind of purple is anything related to social connections. Pretty much everything that I've written down gets one of these colours, but you can kind of see as I'm going through that some colours are more prevalent than others. So if we flip back through to the start, so the brainstorm here effectively has all of the colours really, but we've got a good cluster for work, we've got a little cluster for fun, we've got some orange because, as we said, health and home I decided were kind of related, along with simplicity. Personal development bubble, family, friends, etc. When we get to the goal brainstorm, we distinctly have a good... When we get to the goal brainstorm, the most common one seems to be things related to fun. So we've got, 2, 4, 6 related to fun. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 related to work. 1, 2, 3, 4 related to Vogel, etc. So 4 related to finance as well. We can see that personal development doesn't feature quite as much in here, but, you know, as we continue on. For my values, these were all very much related to health-related things, both physical and mental, but more so mental than anything else, I feel. Like, I kind of tie my authenticity to my mental health, and same idea to comfort, like, you know, when I'm in my comfort zone, I'm feeling better mentally, that kind of stuff. We also have fun as its own core value, so pink, but I also outlined this one in purple because I consider social time to be fun as well. For the level 10 life, we just gave colours to each of those categories, but jumping into the what's bothering me, you can see there was a distinct preference of orange things here, so mental health things are the things that are bothering me, mainly. So for instance, an untidy house has an impact on my mental health, thus why I put it into orange, not into a different colour for just house-related stuff. When it gets to big goals, end of life stuff, we can see a preference for pink things, so fun stuff, and also stuff related to work because it's stuff that I value. And then flipping over, we have a whole bunch of work stuff here because it's all the kind of outside of my comfort zone thing, and my mind just kind of naturally tended towards the things that are outside of my comfort zone with relation to work. And then when we get down here, we have my keep, stop, and start lists. So you can see we have a preference kind of for the fun and the work tasks here. So hopefully you can kind of see it emerging that the majority of stuff that I really I don't know, kind of pulled out of this process as things that I might want to focus on are things mental health related, things related to work and work boundaries in particular, because that ties into the mental health, but then also stuff related to having fun, enjoyable stuff, whether that be social enjoyment or just, me having chill times by myself. We then come to question number 9, which is which of the themes you identified do you want to focus most on next year? Which do you want to focus on most in the first quarter of the year? So I'm going to write that down over here, but I think that kind of came out in the brainstorming that we did for this first section. It's mainly those 3 things that we identified: the fun, the mental health, and the work stuff. While these 3 are going to be my main focus, just given all of the stuff that we had in the prior pages, that's not to say that the other things didn't come up. Like, I know that one of the things that really plays with my mental health is social connection, because seeing people really brings me a lot of joy, builds me up, which obviously ties into fun as well. Similarly, in terms of my work and mental health ones, finances play a role in that too, because, not to say it's the only reason I do what I do, but getting some monetary compensation for my work is preferable, and in terms of mental health, having enough finances to, finance my life in general and keep me fairly comfortable is also something that is going to play into having a positive mental health. So I'm also going to put those ones over here. Finances is as it was stated before, but for connections, I'm kind of considering this to be all-encompassing of family, friends, and my relationship with Vogel. But for the sake of simplicity, I've just assigned it the colour that I gave friendship connections. Now as we have those areas of focus, it is on to step number 10. So from the prior prompts, select your goals for the year or quarter ahead. Write out each of your goals as simple statements that resonate with you. Now, when I see a list of areas of focus put out like this, it is very kind of tempting, I suppose, to just write one goal or one overarching goal for each of those areas. But I don't actually think that that's going to be reasonable for me. In terms of my work or career goal, I don't have just one big goal for that. It is really a multifaceted thing. For instance, I want to release a physical product. I want to properly launch my website. I want to build the JashiiCorrin community because you guys are awesome and I love having you here. So it's not just one kind of statement that I can wrap all of that stuff up in. It's going to be separate, smaller goals. Even though probably none of those sound particularly small, but hopefully that kind of makes sense. So instead what I'm going to do is write out a list of goals, and then from that pick out the ones that are probably going to be my main focuses for the first quarter. Here I'm just writing out the goals that stood out for me as things that I would like to do in 2023 in particular. Once I've written the list though, I'm then going to go through and pick out the ones that I want to work on in the first quarter. Some of these realistically I can't work on in the first quarter because I already know that February is going to be hella busy, so getting some of these things done or even just working on them in that period of time, not realistic. So while the list contains things that I want to do across the entire of 2023, I am just going to pull out the ones that I'm going to work on in the first 3 months. In particular, ones that I know I'm going to work on regular live streams. I want to set that up as kind of a routine. I just think they're a lot of fun and it's just a way to build connection. Thus, I want to strengthen my JashiiCorrin community with more opportunities for genuine connection. I also want to travel to the US because that's happening in March, so that's in the first quarter of the year, and I want to work on my 101 things list. So writing the list and starting to get things done on it, because if you want to do 101 things in a year, you have to effectively do pretty much 2 things a week. I don't actually pressure myself to get all 101 things done, but I would still like to make that a priority because it ties into my leisure and fun area of focus. Now, technically speaking, for the first quarter of the year, I would like to make build better routines surrounding work versus not work time a focus, but realistically, because I'm going to be away at the start of March and February is as busy as it is, I'm going to need to hustle in January. So I just don't think it's realistic to tell myself, hey, I want to be building better routines when my routine is all going to be skew if cattywampus because I have so much stuff going on. So that's probably more likely going to be a priority for the second quarter of the year. Still something I want to work on, it's just that the first 3 months of 2023 are not the right season for it. This one I've left blank because I want to discuss with Vogel before I decide on what our savings goal is going to be, and host an in-person JCC meetup in Washington. Washington DC, sorry. I would like to do that because, I'm gonna be in Washington DC and I don't really go over there very often, and as said, it's happening in March, so that should happen in the first quarter. My no spend / low spend challenge, that one's an all year thing, so that is also going to be a focus. But a Bujo Basics series, I'm not going to focus on that for the first quarter, but it is something that I would like to do next year. Moving on though, it is now time for step 11. So for each of your goals, rate them out of 5 in terms of how enjoyable, practical, interesting, and challenging they seem, with 5 being the most enjoyable, practical, interesting, or challenging, and 1 being the least. So I think I'm gonna move these goals down here, and I'm gonna set up a little kind of table for the enjoyable, practical, interesting, and challenging. In terms of the ratings, so you can see for enjoyable, the highest rating I gave was a 4, and that's just because I'm a harsh marker and I'm hard to please. I'm actually very excited about a lot of these, except for the low / no spend. That one I'm not excited about, it's just I appreciate the challenge. So while I'm a little bit grumpy about it, I'm still not like totally devastated, so it's okay. In terms of the other one that it was a little lower was live streams. I do find live streams enjoyable, don't get me wrong. It's more just that I have, from back over there, live streaming anxiety, or like outside of my comfort zone kind of thing, because, you can't edit those. Well, you can after the fact, but it's different. Anywho, so that one does have a slightly lower enjoyable rating, but still in the realm of smiley face. In terms of practicality, most of them I gave a 3 to, which is kind of, middle of the yard kind of in terms of its practicality. 5 for the Washington DC meetup, because I think that is highly doable, highly practical. In terms of my travel to the US, it's gonna happen. We've already booked the tickets, so it's certainly gonna happen. It's just that there's also other things that I need to consider around that, like forms, documentations, so it's gonna happen, but I gave it a 4 just because I was a little bit about it compared to the Washington DC meetup. In terms of my interest rating, all of those scored highly except for the low spend, no spend, but it is still in the realm of smiley face, so all good. And in terms of challenging, that one was up to a 5. So these two are kind of opposites of each other. I think that these ones aren't going to be very challenging. They have multiple parts to kind of work out, but it's the low spend, no spend that's going to be the most challenging, just given my current spending habits. But a challenge that I am still kind of looking forward to, so all good. Step number 12 is to outline the reason you have for working on each of these goals, and I do recommend thinking of one compelling reason for each of them. You're actually more likely to stick with a goal if you only give yourself one compelling reason rather than a series of like 12 reasons. It's just that like one thing to hold on to is to, I am doing this because. So if we flip on over, we can write out our why or our reasons here. You can see I started at the bottom and worked my way up, but in terms of the goals, I just abridged them. I didn't write them out in full. So the JCC goal, 101 things, Washington DC, etc. So if we have the JCC goal, or the JashiiCorrin community goal, so that idea of developing, strengthening, building genuine connections in our community. And the why I outlined was making a place on the internet where a plan of friends can share their hobbies in a safe and supportive place. So we've got that. Wording isn't necessarily the most beautiful and eloquent English, but honestly it doesn't really need to be. You can workshop your whys to make them, sound a little bit nicer, but as long as it's a genuine reason that you can come back to for why you set out to work on this goal, that's really what matters. So for the 101 things goal, this is bring more fun into life by doing the I always wanted to kind of things. So So the stuff that's those little bits and pieces that I say, oh yeah, I should really try that sometime, or I've always wanted to go and do this. That's the kind of stuff that goes on the 101 things list. For the Washington DC goal, we have to experience another culture while satisfying your travel goals/wishes, just given the fact that one of the things that I outlined on my what do I want to have achieved or experienced in my big life goals was to be well traveled. So, actually getting to go traveling, very exciting. In terms of the JCC meetup goal, this is the Washington DC meetup and planning that. So that is I said to build connections, but really I kind of mean strengthen connections in our community, because I don't really think people are going to come along if they don't actually know us, so we're not starting from scratch there, we're just actually getting to meet in person face to face, which will be fun. In terms of the no spend/low spend goal, my why was to have the opportunity for guilt-free spending on things you genuinely want. One of the reasons why I'm doing a no/low spend is because I have a tendency to just willy-nilly say, oh yeah, I'm gonna go out and buy lunch. And I'm like, you don't need to do that. You have food in the cupboard. Just eat what's in the cupboard. Which means then when I get to, having to fork out a little bit more on a more expensive expense, I get a little bit guilty, like, oh, this is quite a lot. Like, should I really do this? I'm like, well, maybe if you hadn't bought so many plates of sushi. Anyways, I don't want that. I don't want that feeling. It's not a good feeling. So trying out this no spend, low spend business to try and combat that. In terms of my live streaming goal, this is social connections to replace the office interactions you miss now as you work for yourself. There's honestly not a lot I miss about teaching, but I do miss my colleagues and getting to see them every day and the office banter kind of aspect of it. And I think that live streaming is one of those things that, one, will help to build community, and two, will kind of semi-replace that social interaction. I know it's not the same, but I think it's going to fill a need for me. Now as we have our whys down though, that comes to the end of our selecting your goals section, and we're into the action planning your goals section. Now for this section in particular, I kind of encourage you to work through steps 13 to 20 for each of your goals individually. So do 13, 14, 15, etc. for the first goal, and then do them again for the second, and again for the third. We're just going to pick one goal to work through this together. So we're going to go with the no spend/low spend goal. And our first step in the action planning your goals section is, what is the ideal outcome for each of your goals come the end of the year? So for us, looking at the no spend, low spend, what is the ideal outcome for the no spend, low spend? While you're writing your ideal outcome, it could be also helpful to think about our next step, which is number 14. What milestones or metrics of success are there for each of your goals? How will you know you're making progress with each of them? I'm just writing these down as two separate lists underneath my ideal outcome. So we've got the ideal outcome being less spent overall in 2023 compared to 2022, in particular in the areas of food out, entertainment, and other non-essential categories. I also would like to have a clear idea of any pain points that I have for my weekly or monthly spending habits. For my metrics of success related to these, we have less spent in non-essential categories for previously tracked months and overall, and 70% or more of the days in the year marked as no spend. I also want the metric of success of spending trends identified, as mentioned in my ideal outcome. The way I'm actually going to know that I'm making progress on these is that I will check my spending totals during my budgeting sessions that I am attempting to do weekly, just so that I can kind of keep track of each of those spending areas. Am I actually still falling underneath the amount from last year or any amount that I have set for myself? We have the calculating of 70% of the year, so that's 256 days, and 30% of the year being 109, and I just want to keep track of my total spending days. So I'm going to total this up monthly, probably as part of my monthly reset, to make sure that my total number of spend days for the year is under 109 as much as possible. Another way that I'll also know that I'm making progress is by writing out a monthly statement of trends. So I'm going to record that in my journal, and I'm going to give that with reasons. So for instance, if I start finding that, oh, this month and last month I spent the most on the 15th to 20th kind of period. Why might that be? Was there some kind of stressor or something like that? Recording those so that then I have those things to come back to when I try and identify those spending habits. For our next step though, we are going to brainstorm possible actions for each of your goals, or in this case, the no spend/low spend goal. So what steps will you have to take once, monthly, weekly, or daily? I'm just setting myself up some columns. So the one for a once-off task, M for a monthly task, W for weekly, and D for daily, and then after this I can write in what that action is. I'll just put a tick underneath the relevant column so I know what type of action it is. Here I'm just writing in mine, but our 16th step is to check each of your brainstormed actions to make sure that they will actually bring you closer to your desired outcome. And how will they do this? You don't necessarily need to write down how they'll do this, just make sure that they actually do bring you closer to what you want. It's all good and well to actively do these actions, but if they're not actually bringing you closer to your ideal outcome, they're not really helpful. It's also good to note that our 17th step is to check each of your brainstormed actions to make sure that they are simple and actionable, and you can see for some of my actions I've broken them down into separate steps. In particular, the setting of the no-spend rules, the reviewing of the no-spend tracker, and the budgeting. For any of your actions that aren't an individual task though, do break them down until they are, because you need them to be really small, really simple, otherwise subconsciously you're not going to want to work on them because they're going to seem like really big, laborious tasks, to the extent where they're not really tasks, they're kind of projects. They have multiple steps. It's also good to check that you're making sure that all of these are actions. For anything that isn't an action, so something you don't have any control over, or something you can't actually do, then how can we tweak those to turn them into actions? Change the wording so that they are actually actionable. In terms of the actions that I have for my no-spend/low spend goal, we have the setting up of the no-spend tracker, which is technically already done, but it is an action that needed to happen. We have the setting of the no-spend rules, which I've broken down into multiple steps. So talking to Vogel regarding the no-spend, so getting his thought on it, brainstorming what the no-spend rules are, making a rough draft of those rules, getting it checked by Vogel, and then formalizing those rules. And in theory, I need to do all that before January 1st. It seems like a lot, but they are smaller steps, like talking to Vogel, that's a fairly easy step for me. Brainstorming the no-spend rules, that again is a fairly easy step for me, so on and so forth. We have the daily action of tracking the no-spend or yes-spend. We have the monthly action of reviewing the no-spend tracker, so calculating the number of spend days cumulative, as related to this whole 70% goal that I have, and also writing in a trend statement with reasons. So which periods in the month or in each of the weeks did I spend, or was I more likely to spend? Then we also have the weekly task of budgeting, and in particular as part of that budgeting, reviewing the spending categories of the non-essential items to make sure that I'm kind of on track to fall underneath the totals that we had for 2022. Our 18th step is to write a list of resources that you will need or will be helpful in completing your actions. How or when can you obtain these? In terms of the resources that I identified for my goal though, we have the no-spend rules, which I need to make sometime in December. We have the no-spend tracker, which I've already made. We have my spending tracker, which I've already made. And we also have the weekly budgeting time, which I'm going to be doing in my home admin day. Haven't quite decided which day of the week I want that, need some further thought, but that's when it's going to happen. Step number 19 says that some goals work best with a roadmap or when they are backwards planned. Review your goals and see if any would benefit from this approach, and plan them backwards from the outcome you're aiming for come the end of the year. I've kind of done that as I've gone through here. I don't think I actually need to make a full backwards roadmap for this goal, so I'm just going to leave it as it is, but I think there are some of my goals where that would be very beneficial. What I am going to do though is step number 20, so review your notes from the previous steps to make an overview of the actions you will need to take for each of your goals. Now, I would actually kind of like to take this on the same spread as this plan so I don't have to flip back and forth. So I'm just going to put it down the bottom here, which will kind of be nice because it's not a very big set of action steps. I really just want to make it very clear as to what I need to do in each different period of time, because although this is technically the full list, it isn't as user-friendly as it could be. Technically speaking, anything that I write on that left-hand page now is going to be transferred into my everyday bullet journal. As mentioned, this is just my brainstorming book from messy notes, but having them all laid out in the correct sequence is going to be really helpful when it comes to do that transfer. Writing out the summary also gives you an opportunity to prune back any of the action steps, along with, having identified whether they're actually actions and whether they're actually reasonable or if they're too big and if you need to break them down, all of that kind of stuff. You may just find that there's just too many at once, especially if you're focusing on more of like a quarterly basis rather than a full year basis. So going from here to here just gives you an opportunity to prune back to effectively the things that are going to be the most helpful or the most reasonable for the time you're giving yourself. As said, I'm going to be doing those steps again for my other goals. So my JashiiCorrin community goal will go here, and then I'm going to have this page here for my 101 things. As mentioned though, this list of steps is available for free download. The link is in the description box, and I found it really helpful just working through actually figuring out what do I want my focus areas to be, how can I select those goals based on what's going to be most enjoyable, what's going to be most practical for the time that I have, and then breaking it down into actionable steps that are going to be appropriate for the time I've given myself. After action planning all your goals though, we then have the this month ahead section, and that's something that you do every month in the lead up to the next month. So I'll do it at the end of December to lead up to January, I'll do it at the end of January to lead into February, so on and so forth. We're not quite close enough to the end of December yet for me to do this, so I am going to hold off on that one, but for now I'm going to go in and do steps 13 to 20 for my other goals. I'm not going to take you through all of those steps again because I am effectively just doing the same thing repeatedly, but hopefully this process was helpful. I hope you're excited about 2023. Doing this process of goal setting has me very excited about things that are coming. But if you want even more goal-related content, then the playlist we have on screen here is where it's at. Click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.